Taking out the trash. A few months ago, I got bored, and I tried something crazy. I made no effort to hide the fact that I was putting a corpse-shaped tarp wrapped in duct tape into the dumpster behind my apartment complex. I just left it on top. No one even bothered to call the police. I left it there for 2 days, and I never so much as got an angry phone call from my landlord. The truck eventually came by and carted it off. That could have been a real dead body, and no one cared. More to the point, none of my neighbors who saw me do it said a single word to me about it afterwards. It was around that time I began to realize how utterly meaningless life is. I could be a depraved, corpse-fondling serial killer, and no one would bat an eye. But if I neglect to separate my glass from my plastic bottles in a recycle bin, I've got my property manager bitching at me on the phone till 9 in the evening. It absolutely boggles my mind. These people couldn't give a fuck less about a potential dead body in a dumpster, but they'd nitpick over the smallest detail if it remotely broke the cultivated image of a nice apartment complex. I live in a single-story row of one-bedroom apartments about 5 minutes from the interstate in a relatively generic city. I say this because, while there are 1 million people in the metropolitan area, no one is making television shows or movies set in our area. It's just another Midwestern accident that somehow turned into a megacity. My neighbors are mostly single office workers or divorced 30-something-year-old men. Those are the worst. I can always tell it's Saturday morning when my neighbor Jim's screeching crotch spawns shout out at the top of their lungs when they run into his apartment. I asked if he could keep it down those mornings, but he gave me a bullshit excuse and went back to spend time with those 2 fuck trophies from a failed marriage that were about as displeased with his presence as I was. I carried what looked like a corpse to the dumpster in front of his kids, and they never even looked up from their cell phones long enough to notice. As his wife showed up in an SUV with her new, more successful husband, not a word was said as I walked right past him into my apartment. Perhaps the only thing worse than listening to Jim's kids is after his wife leaves, and he plays the same K.D. Lang CD on repeat, and he sobs like a baby and cries himself to sleep. It was raining cats and dogs outside. I'd been up for 10 hours dealing with the debug assertion errors on a batch of code a colleague had left unfinished on the project's Google Drive. It was like 7 in the morning and I was ready to crash, but the cuckolded bastard next door was blasting the same tired music loudly as before. Despite his door being right next to mine, I had to step out in the pouring rain just to knock on his door. It nudged open on the second knock. I stepped inside to get out of the rain, and that's when I noticed Jim in a lace teddy with a bottle of scotch on the table next to him and an empty bottle of pills. His skin was blue and his eyes stared off into the void. I reached to turn off his stereo, and for a brief moment I considered calling the police. Call it morbid fascination or a sick obsession, but I was overwhelmed by the urge to replicate my experiment. I wrapped Jim in a comforter, I grabbed him from his bedroom, I taped him off before lugging him through the rain, and I made my way to the dumpster. I made it a point to go back to his place and wipe everything down. I might have left fingerprints, just in case. A day later, the truck came, and he was gone. In fact, no one noticed Jim was gone until he was late on rent, and the landlord ended up using his key to get into his apartment. I guess that's how things work in this complex. No one cares enough to interact, and everyone is happy to leave well enough alone. It wasn't a week before the unit had been rented out to a woman in her mid-30s. Thankfully, she didn't seem to have kids for a weekend visitation, and if she played any music, I never heard it through the paper-thin walls that separated our apartments. I hadn't actually killed anyone, but if I had, I realized all too horrifyingly how easy it was to get away with murder. Jim's ex-wife never showed up looking for him. I eventually tracked him down on his Facebook page, and not a single person had even left a comment asking where he was. Before long, I was Facebook stalking my new neighbor. She posted photos of food she ate, and generally had like 2 or 3 likes on each post, all from the same people, and I'm pretty sure one was her mother. I spent the rest of the night looking up the people that lived in my apartment complex, and it became clear to me that all of us were disposable people. We had little, if any, connection to others in the outside world at large. My building and the one across the parking lot that served as a mirror image to it served as a home for the people that no one would miss. No one cared for Jim, no one cared that he killed himself, no one cared that I left dead bodies in a dumpster, and no one cared that Karen, the woman who lived next door, posted pictures of food she ordered at Chipotle and shared cat memes. We were all forgotten people who existed only in the sense that we worked a job and generated income for our landlords. I decided to break the cycle and do something about it. I waited around until 7 in the morning, and I made it a point to lean on the hood of my car smoking a cigarette as Karen came out of her apartment. She smiled awkwardly and I waved. I spent all night working up the urge to actually connect with another human being, and in a moment, I felt like a wet feather mattress had been dropped on my chest. I awkwardly said, "Welcome to the neighborhood," and I forced a smile. Karen responded with, "Oh, thanks," as she shuffled past me and into her car. I dropped the half-smoked butt on the ground as I walked to my apartment feeling defeated. I spent the rest of the day in bed trying to sleep as I wrestled with the existential dread that had been seeping into my mind for weeks by that point. Knowing that I was all but invisible to the outside world was soul-crushing enough as it is, but being unable to connect with utterly lonely people sealed the deal. Something inside me was broke. I turned my attention from Karen and made it my point to interact with anyone I saw outside. Most said exactly enough to politely leave the conversation and went back to their solitude. It wasn't enough that these poor bastards were doomed to be alone. They seemed content with it. At least Jim had the presence of mind to end the monotony of it all. Somewhere along the line, I decided that I wanted the corner apartment next to the dumpster. Unlike my apartment, its southern wall had a second window in the living room that faced the adjacent apartment building. It sounds silly, but the thought of having just a little bit more natural light and a better view seemed really appealing to me. The only problem was James had lived there for 10 years, and he seemed to have no desire to move. I bumped into Karen as I was loading James' body into the dumpster. She was struggling with her bags, and I offered to toss them in. She didn't even seem to notice that her rubbish was being used to cover the body of our recently deceased neighbor. She either didn't notice or didn't care that I reeked of industrial solvents that I used to clean up my mess. She simply smiled awkwardly and walked back to her apartment. By the end of the month, I had moved into my new apartment, and I had found myself enjoying the view. The people in the building, see, they weren't like us. They had parties, and they seemed to have visitors. On more than one occasion, I had seen them talking to their neighbors. I longed for that kind of social interaction, but I couldn't wrap my mind around a way to solicit that kind of attention from others. It didn't take a rocket surgeon to figure out that Karen thought I was creepy. I mean, I don't blame her. I did leave bodies in a dumpster and talk to anyone I noticed outside. I wasn't exactly Miss Congeniality of Weldon Court. I think that's what made it especially hard. One night, while I was going through my nightly rounds of Facebook stalking the other residents in our shared apartment complex, I noticed that Karen had made a status update about her creepy neighbor. As I read through the post, I realized she thought I was stalking her. I mean, I was, but not the way she perceived it. She thought I was like some sort of freaky sex criminal or something. Even still, I realized that she might have noticed more than I thought she did. I really didn't want to risk losing my apartment, much less my freedom. The lease had a very clear zero-tolerance clause for sexual harassment, and I realized all it would take was a single complaint and I'd be forced to find another place to live. My lazy landlord never changed the locks on these apartments. He has a key to all the doors, and he just makes copies when a new tenant moves in. I took no joy in moving Karen into that dumpster. I really hoped we'd develop something that resembled a friendship. Even still, she rested on the top of the mountain of discarded microwave dinners and milk cartons that comprised the waste produced by our collective sadness and solitude. No one said a goddamn word, just like before. No one even attempted to reach her by posting on her wall. As I suspected, she was just another disposable person that had been sent to the trash. And that summed up her life. No kids, no job. She lived on alimony from a failed marriage, and lived with the knowledge that her husband was plowing a woman 10 years her junior with a kid on the way. On the one hand, I was 2 murders into an incredibly self-destructive habit. I took no joy in the act itself, and my only real satisfaction came in the realization that yet again, I had disposed of the evidence with the most minimal of effort. 3 missing persons that no one missed, 2 violent murders, and no one was investigating. It became clear to me that someone could do the very same thing to me and no one would miss me. My ex-husband had long since remarried. I didn't have any kids, my parents were estranged, I had no siblings, I worked from home, and I only talked to my boss on the phone about once a week. If that, with the exception of casual interaction from the residents of Weldon Court, I could go weeks at a time without any real human contact. Given the ease in which I disposed of the others, and how easy it was to fall into the pattern of this behavior, I realized I probably wasn't the only person killing residents of our apartment complex. I lived in Building A. Directly across me was Building B. In the mirror to my apartment was a man in his 40s named Jerry. Jerry almost never left his apartment. When he did, it was to make short trips to the dumpster or to check his mail. Even his groceries were delivered. It didn't take me long to notice that his habits were eerily similar to mine. It wasn't long until I had placed a pinhole spy camera on his window, and on the window to his back door. Each apartment had a windowed back door facing a concrete porch in the bedroom. When I wasn't working through code or working up the nerve to talk to others, I was watching the camera feed. Jerry was a creature of habit. Each night, he'd hack away on his keyboard, doing something or the other while taking breaks to masturbate or hit the bathroom. Several days of this passed by before I noticed something odd. He had stepped away to use the bathroom, and I noticed the image on his screen looked eerily similar to mine. I started scouring the window at my back door and noticed a white pinhole camera tucked under the window blind. I wouldn't have noticed it unless I was looking for it. I found the others and I moved them all to my monitor. I placed each one in a row on top of my monitor and I stared at them. Jerry had done the same. I stared at him, he stared at me. His face was a dark reflection of my own. If I smiled, he smiled. If I stood up to move or go outside the range of cameras, he did the same. This all changed when I returned to my monitor and he was writing something on a piece of paper. He held it up and it showed a single word. You. He proceeded to toss the paper in a waste bin behind him. He knew, and he had every intention of snuffing me out. He walked off camera and was gone for several minutes. It had dawned on me he was moving towards my apartment. James was asleep when I bashed his head in with a hammer. Karen had been sitting on her recliner with a pair of headphones when I came up behind her with a garrote. At no point in my life had I actually been in a fight with another human being, and it was dawning on me that I could end up in the dumpster with each passing moment. I briefly considered running to my car, but then I realized he might already be waiting for me. Instead, I opted to order a pizza to Jerry's apartment. As the delivery driver pulled up, I moved towards my car and was inside just in time to see Jerry stand up from behind the dumpster and move towards the pizza guy. I spent the rest of my night at the Waffle House, using the team viewer on my laptop to watch Jerry sitting there as he ate pizza and stormed around his apartment. I waited until he was in bed to drive home. I parked down the street. I walked to my back door to avoid being seen. I looked at my screen, and Jerry remained in bed. I turned off my streaming app, and I made my way outside. I didn't have the keys to Jerry's apartment, but one of the things I found about our incredibly lazy landlord setup was how easy it was to jimmy the locks. I'd used an old debit card to gain access to his back door, only to find his bed empty. I moved slowly to the kitchen. I checked his bathroom. The living room and its adjacent closet were also clear. I moved back to his computer and I stared at the screen. I saw him standing over my bed with a baseball bat. He looked over at the camera for a moment before heading out to the back door. I stepped into his bedroom closet and I waited as he re-entered his bedroom. The kitchen knife in my hand didn't offer much of a way of comfort as I watched him sit at his desk. I stood there, halfway holding my breath. For the better part of 10 minutes, I worked up the nerve to bust out of the closet and plant the knife in his neck. I pulled the knife away. As a spurt of blood exploded across the room and splashed the wall, I brought the knife down again, and just as he threw up his hands, it went through his forearm. He wrenched his arms away and took the knife with him. As he stood there, grasping his neck, he stared at me with hateful eyes as I picked up his baseball bat. My first swing connected with his forearm, and it made a crunching sound as it bent his arm backwards. My second swing connected with his temple. My last swing landed on the back of his head and sent him to the ground. I set to work cleaning and wrapping him up per usual. Just as I was finishing up, I noticed the green LED light on his webcam still on. I pulled up various windows on his taskbar and realized that he had been recording the whole incident as a YouTube live stream. It was set to save the stream as soon as the connection ended. I have no idea how many, if anyone, viewed the stream, but I became increasingly aware of the fact that someone may have watched me kill Jerry. I sat there and I ended the stream before frantically moving to delete the video from his channel. I proceeded to take his computer with me to the dumpster. I tossed Jerry and his computer into the trash, and I spent the next 2 days locked in my apartment, frantically searching the web for any mention of Jerry being missing or local murder investigations. Ultimately, no one cared. No one cared, and I was safe to live my life. None of my neighbors seemed to notice Jerry's absence, and no one cared if I was inside cowering or outside peering around the corners like a paranoid crackhead. My landlord showed up a few days later to inform me that I was being evicted. Enough of the residents had complained about my erratic behavior, and I was given 30 days to move out. I briefly considered fighting it, but realized I was better off moving on. It didn't take me long to find a new place on the other side of town. I gotta admit, I love my new neighbors. One of them even greeted me with a six-pack and an offer to come over sometime. I just might take him up on that offer. I think one of my favorite things about this new building is there are trash chutes on every floor. I haven't had much of an opportunity to figure out what my limits are, but I'm keenly aware that each hatch drops into a dumpster outside. I doubt I'll ever have to use them like that. My neighbors seem nice. Well, all but this one bastard that lives in the next door to me. He keeps playing the same fucking playlist every night.